Today, Luigi Mangione will appear in a Manhattan courtroom. He faces murder and terrorism charges in the death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Thompson was gunned down outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel back in December. And Mangione faces 11 counts in New York and has pleaded not guilty to all charges. And joining us now to discuss is legal analyst Tracy Pearson. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. So what can we expect from today's court hearing?
Today's court hearing is a hearing that was scheduled back when he was arraigned, and it is something that's called a control calendar automatic entry, where it is put in place so that the court can just keep track of the case and find out where people are, if discovery's been exchanged, if there's motions that they intend to file, and maybe even calendaring some things.
And a possibility of a trial date even being set?
Possibly. I wouldn't necessarily bank on it, but possibly.
Okay, still early on that. But there has been talk about what the defense might argue, with some believing Mangione could plead insanity. So what are you expecting from the defense?
I think that it's possible that he could plead insanity. It's a very difficult defense to plead. It is an affirmative defense, so we'll know if he's doing it in advance because he'll have to plead it in writing to give the state notice. What it requires is that the defendant prove, if the jury determines that he's guilty, that he proved by a preponderance of the evidence that he lacked criminal capacity or responsibility by mental disease and defect. I think it's very difficult here to establish that, given the intentional planning that allegedly went around this. But it's not impossible. I think it's more likely, frankly, based on the public perception of this, that while you can't argue it legally, that there may be an attempt to introduce evidence for jury nullification, where the jury says, well, you were guilty, but we're going to find you not guilty.
And you mentioned the public perception, and Mangione has been getting this outpouring of donations, of support. How much of a challenge does that present when it comes time for jury selection?
That is a huge perception problem. As we saw with the case involving Donald J. Trump, State of New York versus Donald J. Trump, there was a very difficult jury process, selection process. It's going to be that way here because there's been so many donations that have been made to a public fund for him. And I also think that it's also going to be difficult because recently one of those donations was made anonymously. So they're going to have to make sure that the jurors aren't people who contributed to this fund.
Okay, very interesting. And also, I want to talk a bit about, so the Mangione faces these 11 state criminal counts in New York, but then he also faces federal charges. So can you explain how these overlap or how they interact?
Sure. We have two sovereigns in this country. We have a state sovereign and we have a federal sovereign. They do not interact with each other in the sense of they depend on each other. The state is going to go first, as far as we know at this point, and then it'll move over to the federal system. The elements and the requirements for the prosecutors to prove each of these charges are different. I think there's some difficulty in the state case in New York with the first-degree murder terrorism charge, because that statute in particular requires that they establish that it was an attempt to terrorize the civilian population. In this situation, what we're talking about is an alleged individual targeting of one person. It was a statute that was enacted after 9/11, so it makes sense in that context, maybe not in this one.
Okay, well, Tracy Pearson, thank you so much, a legal analyst. Really appreciate you joining us here this morning. And you can find continuing coverage of today's court hearing on our website, cbsnewyork.com.